Welcome back to the second part of Materials and Lighting. This is sort of the continuation of Lesson 11, where we set up materials and as well as a texture map and a couple bump maps on our cart. And I mentioned there at the end that we would move on to lighting the headlights, adding materials and lighting to that. But before we get to that, I think we'll save that for the end. That's actually fairly simple, quick setup. Let's go ahead and light our scene, and even before we do that, let's set up a new camera for our scene. Right now we're using the perspective camera, and the perspective is really nice for us to just kind of maneuver around in for setting up our scene. And when you have a scene that's almost done, you usually want to create its own camera, the camera that will be used for rendering. So let's go ahead and create that. And it has defaulted right there in the center. If I select 4, you can now see that. That's our new camera in the scene. So coming back to 6. And we can position that one of two ways. We can just put the move manipulator on it and move it around and rotate it into place. But a much better way is really to come under panels and say look through selected camera. We are now inside that camera. We're underneath the vehicle right now, and the way you move it is just the way you would move within Maya. So I've got the Alt button held down, and I'm using the right mouse button to dolly back, pushing back, and I'm now selecting the middle mouse button and the left mouse button, kind of a combination of the two, sort of rotating that into position. And kind of back to where that perspective view was, sort of a 3/4 front view of the cart. And that looks pretty good. And let's go ahead and name our camera. Leave camera on there and call it camera main. So we know this is the main camera that's going to be used for our rendering right here. You can also call it camera render. Main is often used in production to just sort of signify this is the main camera used for the scene. The animators might have their own camera set up. If they have a close-up on a character, they might set up their own camera so they can see the different expressions, but it would not necessarily be the camera used to render the scene out. So a lot of times you'll have many cameras in a scene. In this case, this is just our render camera. A few other things under here to just go over very quickly. This is the panels. It has its own set of icons under here. This is just sort of shortcuts. This is the grid that we turned off. You can sort of toggle it on and off here. The next one over is the film gate. So this is seeing what would be the full aperture. In this case, it's a 1:3 aspect ratio is the default. The next one over is the resolution gate. So we have 640 by 480 set up as our resolution. The next one over is a mask that turns on and off. I kind of like to have it off. I don't like this area kind of masked out. Some people do. They just want to see what's inside the view here. Next one over is a grid here that's often used for animation as well as just lining cameras up. We don't really need that, but you can know about that there. The next one over does affect our scene here. This is the safe action. You can see that if you hover over. And this is where your scene would play out, is inside here. And this is what would actually get projected, or our television sets would see up to this area right here. Some may capture a little bit more area, but this area out here, the 640 by 480, that full aperture right there is going to get cut off. So you don't want to have a scene that's set up like this, and you need to see the wheel or the top or some type of actions going on there outside this film gate area, because it will get cut off when it is either projected or viewed on television. So let's set it up so we are inside our safe area here for action. And the last one here is title safe. So your credits and your titles would go inside this safe area for titles. We don't need to have that on. Let's toggle that off. So with this setup, let's go ahead and set up our, let's just revisit our render settings, make sure everything is set up properly. Mental ray is what we're using, and if that is not showing up when you open up this pull down here. If you don't see Mental Ray, the plugin is not loaded. You'll have to load that up manually by going under Settings and Preferences, Plugin Manager, and then you'll see down here, Maya to Mental Ray. That's the plugin right there. Just click Loaded and Auto Load, and then it should come up here. And under Common, now that we have a new camera in here, the one that we're going to be rendering with, this is the default perspective. We'll change it over to Camera Main. There it is. We'll leave our presets to 640 by 480 and aspect ratio 133. Under Quality, we're going to go ahead and select Production. There's draft and preview. These are all a little bit lower resolution. And then there's production settings for different things like motion blur, fur hair, fine trace. If we were going to be rendering out a scene here that needed a lot of high quality to it, we could use that. But because we're setting up our scene right now, we want to get a pretty good idea of what it looks like. And we are using shadows. Let's go ahead and use production quality. And under indirect lighting, let's select Final Gather. Make sure that's turned on. And that should be good there. Let's go ahead and render our scene. And this is actually rendering out, you can see it's quite different than our setup here. This is still selecting the perspective view. Often this render view here will continue to default until we change it. So it says current perspective. We want to say current main camera. And it's going to render again. We should see the same 3/4 front view that we're seeing. And however, you're noticing now that the background is black. We have to go in and set up those attributes the way we had them before. So let's go ahead and do that now. This is selecting the attributes to the camera and coming under Main Shape, scroll down to Environment, and select that black and just give it sort of a middle gray color like that. And that should be good. And let's go ahead and render that scene again. Okay, so there we have it. We've got our nice soft shadows, a little bit of reflection here happening. This breakup we're seeing here, I think, is being caused by the ground plane, as well as the canopy. The canopy is going to cause some problems for lighting, and we may not resolve all of them here. If you have any specific issues with yours, I can probably come around and help you in class. But for now, let's go ahead and set up our first light, the key light. And we will do that by going under Create, Lights, Spotlight. And we're going to use spotlights for all of our lights in here. And the reason being is it gives us the most control. And we're going after sort of a studio lighting. We're lighting one object in a scene here. We don't have a large scene with an exterior setting with lots of sets and everything. If we did, we would use something like directional light. Directional light's a little harsh, a little hard to control as well. There's not a lot of nice fall-offs and sort of softness that we can create with directional lighting that we can with the spotlight. Just very quickly here, ambient light is more for the advanced lighter. It can really flatten out your scene very quickly if you don't know what you're doing with it. It's used very specifically in scenes. Directional lighting, again, is for more exterior lighting of sets, large lighting areas. Point lighting, again, is very specific. It can be used for lighting candles or lamps within a room or very specific areas that need to be lit. It can also be set up for kind of capturing glints in eyes. You can set them up and link them directly to eyeballs in a scene and kind of give it a nice little glint, highlight. The spotlight is what we're going to be using. Area lights are also quite nice. They take a little bit longer to render and a little bit more setup time, something that we can do in a later something we can do in a later project, as well as volume lighting. We don't really need to use that here. So let's just go ahead and select our spotlight. It is also defaulted in the middle of the scene there. I'm not going to move this. We're still on our main camera. If I move the main camera, we're going to have a new setup. But what I'm going to do is come under panels and say look through selected camera. This is actually looking through the cone of our spotlight. All the lights have a camera attached to them, so you can look through them just the way you would a camera. And I'm just double clicking on that to open it up. This is our attributes here for that. And I'm going to come over here and say key light. And under the shape, this is where most of our attributes are that we're going to be affecting. I'm going to change the color a little bit. I'm going to kind of warm it up. Give it sort of a soft, warm color, kind of in the orange-yellow range. I'm going to leave the intensity at 1, the default. These will be left at default as well. And the cone angle, I'm going to bump that up to 60 degrees, a little bit wider. Penumbra is sort of the softness, the way the light falls off. Right now it's just going to end very abruptly, which lights don't normally do that. There is a fall off. So 10 is a pretty good setting. You can give this a positive or negative number. So this is the original, this is our cone angle right here, the penumbra, and so the brightness begins to fade off and drops completely off here at that penumbra angle setting. You can give it a negative number as well, and it will begin dropping off. This is the penumbra here, so the penumbra will begin dropping off right here, and when you reach the outside edge of the cone angle, it will be completely dropped off there. Drop off is another sort of way in which the light sort of falls off, and we'll just give that a low number like 5. And with this selected, make sure it's selected, I'm holding down the Alt key and using the right mouse button, and I'm just backing up. We're kind of underneath the car. You can see the wheels here, and now the front end. And I'm going to start rotating it at the top here. I'm going to hit 7 on my keyboard so we can now see that light. And if I were to kind of change the intensity, there's our light right there. Let's bring it back down to 1. And I'm going to kind of back up a little bit here just to see my scene. This is the main camera that we set up. And typically you want to keep your key light off to one side of the camera. So you don't want it directly lined up with the camera in front of it like that. You know, ideally like a 45-degree angle. And I'm going to sort of go a little bit more high noon. This is going to force our shadows underneath and on the back side of the cart, so it's a little bit easier to deal with. And I'm just going to move in on it a little bit tighter here. The position of how close your camera, your light camera is to the object does have an effect on the quality of your shadow. So if you're way back out here and you're using what are called depth maps, which is what we are going to use here. There's 2 types of maps. There's depth maps, and there are ray trace shadow maps, or they're not maps, they're just ray trace shadows. These are pretty easy to set up, and they do simulate sort of real world type shadows. They have higher render times. You really have to bump up a lot of the light radius to get a soft shadow, as well as the number of rays and then the depth limit. A little bit of playing around to get that set up. But you should get really familiar with using depth maps. This is what is predominantly used still in film. Feature film production always uses this. It has not switched over to using any type of ray trace shadows, just because there's a lot more control over the depth map shadows, and you can simulate that real world soft shadow fall off that the other shadows will give you.